She was just the maid, the woman everyone mocked, ordered around, and ignored. But today, in front of investors, reporters, and the CEO who stole everything from her, she stepped onto the stage with a mop in one hand and evidence in the other. When the screen lit up, every blueprint, every design, every secret bore her name, not his. The CEO froze, sweat dripping, as the empire he built on lies began to collapse. But here's the brutal question. Would they believe her truth, or bury her one last time? This is the story of how the mocked maid revealed she was the genius running the company all along. The laughter echoed through the glass walls of the company's grand lobby. Expensive heels clicked on the marble floor, designer suits brushed past, and in the middle of it all, on her knees, was a dark-skinned maid in a plain uniform, quietly gathering papers someone had accidentally knocked from her cleaning cart. "Be careful, maid," one of the junior executives sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "These documents are worth more than your entire life savings. Don't get them dirty with those hands." The others chuckled, tossing casual insults that sliced sharper than knives. Shouldn't she be polishing shoes instead of touching company files? Maybe she's here dreaming she owns the place. But Amara kept her head bowed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just collected the scattered papers, her dark eyes briefly glinting, not with shame, but with something none of them could see, knowledge. What they didn't know, what none of them could imagine, was that this very woman, mocked as the invisible maid, had designed the very system their company thrived on. Every deal they celebrated, every profit margin they bragged about, every innovation they presented as their own, it was her mind behind it all. But Amara stayed silent. She had her reasons. That night, as the office lights dimmed and the building emptied, Amara didn't go home like the others. She moved through the executive floors with the confidence of someone who knew every hidden corner. She slid a keycard, one that shouldn't belong to a maid, into the restricted research lab door. The lock clicked open. Inside, blueprints, confidential reports, and digital schematics lined the walls. On the central table lay a sleek prototype device, worth billions. Amara placed her hand on it, her reflection staring back at her from the polished surface. For a moment, her eyes welled. Memories flashed. A younger Amara, brilliant and ambitious, dismissed at interviews because of her skin, her accent, her background. Meetings where her ideas were stolen. Projects where her credit was erased. And finally, the humiliation of being forced to take the only job offered to her, a maid in the very company she had once dreamed of leading. But she hadn't given up. She had studied in silence. Watched in silence, built in silence. And tonight, the silence would end. "Mock me as a maid," she whispered to the empty room, her voice steady. "Tomorrow, you'll kneel before the genius you tried to bury." The door creaked behind her. A figure stepped in. "Amara," a man's voice said, low and sharp. "What are you doing here?" Her heart froze. It was Daniel, the CEO of the company. The same man who often led the laughter against her. He stared at her, confusion and suspicion in his eyes. She straightened, no longer hiding, no longer bowing. "Daniel," she said calmly, almost defiantly, "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago, claiming what's mine." He blinked as if not comprehending. Then he laughed, bitter and dismissive. "What could you possibly claim here? You're nothing but a maid." Amara's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. She turned the prototype toward him, the company logo gleaming under the dim light. "This design," she said, tapping the blueprint. "This innovation your board is about to present to the world. Every equation, every circuit, every breakthrough came from my mind. While you laughed, I built. While you mocked, I mastered. And while you ignored me, I became the genius behind the empire you think you own." Daniel's face drained of color. His voice shook, though he tried to sneer. "You expect anyone to believe that? A maid?" Amara stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "They won't just believe. They'll have no choice. Because I kept every record, every file, every proof. And when I reveal the truth, the world will know who the true mastermind of this company is." The silence that followed was heavy, dangerous, electric. And in that moment, standing between mockery and revelation, Amara knew her life and the company's future would never be the same again. If you were Amara, mocked, overlooked, but secretly holding all the power, would you reveal your true identity immediately or wait until the perfect moment? Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Amara's mornings always began before dawn. She lived in a tiny one-room apartment on the rougher edge of the city, where the water from the tap sometimes ran brown and the neighbors' arguments bled through thin walls. Her uniform, always freshly washed and ironed, hung neatly by the door. She wore it with a strange kind of dignity, though to the outside world it was just the garment of a maid. Every morning, she braided her hair back, whispered a prayer into the worn cross pendant her mother had given her, and walked into a world that saw her as invisible. The employees at the company rarely acknowledged her, except to toss commands or mockery in her direction. And yet, Amara walked those gleaming hallways with her eyes open, her ears sharp, her memory storing details most executives would overlook. Because while they saw a maid, she saw an empire, and every empire has cracks. Years ago, Amara was not cleaning floors or serving coffee. She had been a rising star in engineering. Top of her class, praised by professors, she dreamed of creating systems that could revolutionize industries. But every time she applied for jobs at big firms, the same cycle repeated: polite smiles, empty promises, and rejection letters. She remembered one particular interview vividly. The panel had been impressed by her presentation. Her ideas on integrating renewable energy with AI were years ahead of their time. But then one man leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and asked casually, "Tell me, Miss Amara, do you really think clients will trust a black maid's daughter with billion-dollar projects?" The words stung like acid. They didn't even see her as an engineer. Just the daughter of a domestic worker. Just another face to dismiss. When months turned to years, and bills piled up, Amara had no choice. She accepted a janitorial position, ironically, at the very company that had once rejected her ideas. She told herself it was temporary, but the months stretched. The executives forgot her name, if they ever knew it at all. But Amara remembered every blueprint she had ever sketched, every rejected idea, every humiliation. And so, in silence, she kept creating. At night, after scrubbing floors, she sat at her second-hand laptop, working on designs. By day, she listened to executives discuss their breakthroughs, only to realize they were echoes of ideas she herself had whispered into the void years before. Daniel was sharp, ambitious, and ruthless. He thrived on intimidation and prided himself on being the face of innovation. He was one of the loudest voices mocking Amara, convinced of his own superiority. To him, she was nothing more than background noise. But Daniel had secrets, financial embezzlements, stolen credit, and a trail of betrayal. If Amara rose, Daniel would fall. Unlike Daniel, Clarissa rarely mocked Amara. She didn't speak much to her at all. But behind her cold, calculating silence was someone who noticed things. She had once seen Amara jotting equations on a cleaning checklist. Clarissa filed the image away but said nothing, perhaps out of caution, perhaps because she, too, had once been underestimated in a man's world. Mrs. West, Amara's mother. Though frail now, Mrs. West remained Amara's anchor. She had worked as a maid her whole life, and she believed in her daughter's brilliance with unshakable faith. "They may laugh now," she often told her, "but the day will come when the world bows to the mind they tried to bury." Her voice echoed in Amara's heart whenever despair tempted her to give up. Amara's days were a cycle of invisibility and humiliation. Yet she held on to her dream. What kept her alive was not just survival, but the hunger to prove, one day, that she was more than what the world chose to see. Every insult carved deeper scars, but also sharper edges. Every laugh hardened her resolve. And every secret document she glimpsed while cleaning executive offices became another piece of ammunition. What no one knew was that Amara had been secretly developing a revolutionary algorithm, one that could double the company's value overnight. It was her ace, her secret weapon. But she couldn't reveal it yet, not until the perfect storm arrived. And that storm was already brewing. Because the company's annual board presentation, the event that determined leadership, power, and the future, was only weeks away. And this year, Amara wouldn't just be cleaning the hall. She would be rewriting history. Have you ever been underestimated or overlooked, only to later prove everyone wrong? How did it feel when the truth came out? That's the setup. Now the stage is set with Amara's backstory, her emotional drivers, and the key players, Daniel, Clarissa, her mother. The week of the annual board presentation arrived, and the entire building buzzed with nervous energy. Executives rehearsed speeches, designers polished prototypes, and assistants rushed around with clipboards and coffee. Amara, as always, was given the least dignified tasks. That morning, she was ordered to scrub the marble floors of the executive conference hall, while the very men and women who had mocked her prepared to unveil their grand innovation. She worked quietly, her mop sliding across the floor, while Daniel and a group of directors argued over the final presentation slides. "This is our breakthrough," Daniel declared, tapping the glowing screen where the design of the prototype shimmered. "Once the board approves, our market value doubles. And I'll take the lead on rolling it out." Amara's hands stilled on the mop. She knew every line of that blueprint, every circuit, every formula, because she had created it. Her chest tightened as Daniel spoke with the confidence of a man presenting another's soul as his own. And then, something happened. A folder slid from Daniel's leather briefcase and fell open on the floor, scattering documents. As Amara knelt to gather them, her eyes caught a single page, her original sketches, the ones she had drawn years ago, watermarked with her name still faintly visible in the corner. Her blood ran cold. How did Daniel have her private work? "Be careful, Maid," Daniel snapped, snatching the folder from her hand. His eyes flickered with something, panic, recognition, fear, before he covered it with his usual sneer. "Don't touch what you can't understand." But Amara did understand. More than anyone. That night, unable to shake what she had seen, she returned home and pulled out her old laptop. She scrolled through the files. Her designs, her equations, her data. And there it was, undeniable. Daniel's revolutionary prototype was a direct copy of her work. Her work had been stolen. Amara's hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from rage. All these years, they had mocked her, belittled her, made her scrub their floors, while they profited from her genius. 4 hours she sat in silence, staring at the glowing screen. Finally, she whispered to herself, "No more silence. If they want to present my work, I will be there, and I will make them choke on the truth." The decision was made. Amara would no longer hide behind a maid's uniform. She would step into the light, not only to reclaim her creation, but to reclaim her dignity. And fate wasted no time testing her resolve. The next morning, Clarissa, the CFO, approached her in the hallway. Clarissa rarely spoke, but her eyes were sharp. She held out a small USB drive, her voice low. "You dropped this yesterday," Clarissa said. Amara frowned. She hadn't dropped anything. She took the drive cautiously. "Careful who you trust," Clarissa added, her gaze lingering. Then she walked away. Amara stood frozen, the tiny object burning in her palm. What was on it? Why had Clarissa given it to her? And more importantly, was this the key to exposing the truth? Her heart pounded. The game had begun. That night, after her shift, Amara sat at the small wooden table in her apartment, staring at the USB drive Clarissa had given her. The room was quiet except for the steady ticking of the wall clock. Her fingers hovered above the laptop keyboard. What if this was a trap? What if Clarissa suspected her and was setting her up? Yet curiosity, and the faint glimmer of trust, pushed her forward. She slid the drive in. A single folder appeared on the screen, confidential. Inside were dozens of files, financial statements, hidden emails, contracts, all pointing to one chilling truth. Daniel had been stealing not just her work, but millions from the company's research fund. He had been funneling money into offshore accounts, all while presenting Amara's innovations as his own. And Clarissa, she had the proof. Amara's hands shook as she scrolled. It wasn't just theft, it was corruption on a scale that could destroy the company. And if she revealed this, Daniel wouldn't just lose his position, he could go to prison. But why had Clarissa trusted her with this information? The answer came the next day. As Amara polished the brass railings in the executive wing, Clarissa stepped out of her office. She glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "You opened the files, didn't you?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. Amara swallowed, her mop frozen midair. "Yes." "Good," Clarissa said. "Because you're the only one who can use them. Daniel thinks he's untouchable. But he's built his empire on lies. Lies I've watched for years." Amara studied her carefully. "Why me?" For the first time, Clarissa's mask cracked, and Amara saw something raw in her eyes. "Because I've been where you are. A woman in a world that laughs at women. A voice they tried to silence. But you still have the fire to fight. I don't." Amara's chest tightened. Could she really trust Clarissa? Or was she just another player in a larger game? Before she could ask, footsteps echoed down the hall. Daniel's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "There you are, Clarissa," he said smoothly, his sharp eyes flicking briefly toward Amara. "Why are you wasting time with the maid?" Clarissa smiled thinly. "Just reminding her to keep the floors spotless for the board." Daniel smirked, but his gaze lingered on Amara a beat too long, as though he suspected something. That night, Amara replayed Clarissa's words. She thought of her mother's tired voice. "They may laugh now, but the day will come when the world bows to the mind they tried to bury." And she thought of Daniel's sneer, his arrogance. The perfect storm was indeed coming. But the deeper Amara dug, the more dangerous it became. Strange things started happening. One evening, she returned to her apartment to find her laptop moved from where she'd left it. Another night, she noticed a black car idling at the corner of her street. And once, as she finished cleaning the research lab, she swore she heard footsteps following her, only to turn and find no one there. Someone new. Still, Amara pressed on. She used Clarissa's files to trace patterns of theft and deceit, slowly piecing together the puzzle. With each discovery, her resolve hardened. But she also uncovered something she hadn't expected. Buried in the email chains was her name. Her projects. Her ideas. Proof that not only had Daniel stolen her designs, but he had known all along exactly who the real genius was. And worse, he had deliberately kept her trapped as a maid, ensuring she never had the chance to rise. The realization hit her like ice. This wasn't just theft. It was sabotage. A war against her existence. Amara closed her laptop, her fists clenched. "They thought I was invisible," she whispered into the night. "But I'm done hiding." The board meeting was now only days away. And when it came, the truth would not just whisper, it would roar. The day of the board presentation arrived. The building shimmered with polished glass and tension. Executives rehearsed their speeches in hushed tones, assistants scurried with last-minute notes, and the grand conference hall gleamed under golden lights. Amara, dressed in her plain maid uniform, carried a tray of glasses into the hall. To the world, she was still invisible. But inside her uniform pocket was a small flash drive loaded with Clarissa's files, evidence that could bring Daniel's empire crashing down. Her heart pounded as she moved among the crowd, pretending to serve. The plan was simple: wait until Daniel began presenting her design, then step forward with the proof. For once, the truth would not hide. But fate rarely follows plans. As the board members filed in, Amara noticed something unusual. Clarissa wasn't seated with the finance team. Instead, she sat directly beside Daniel, whispering into his ear, her expression unreadable. Amara's stomach clenched. Why was Clarissa with him? The lights dimmed. Daniel took the stage, his voice smooth, commanding, dripping with false pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today we unveil a design that will change not only this company but the world." The screen behind him lit up with the prototype, the very one Amara had created years ago. Gasps of admiration filled the room. The board leaned forward, eager, impressed. Amara's fingers brushed the flash drive in her pocket. Her moment had come. She stepped forward, just as Clarissa rose from her seat. "Before we proceed," Clarissa announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "there's something the board should know." Every eye turned to her. Even Daniel faltered, surprise flashing across his face. Clarissa's gaze swept the room, cold and precise. Then, slowly, she raised a file, the same evidence she had given Amara. "This innovation," she declared, "was not the work of Daniel. Nor was it stolen by rivals. The truth is," she paused, her eyes flicking deliberately toward Amara, "this design was originally the work of a former engineer who sold her concepts years ago for a fraction of their worth. Daniel simply perfected them." A collective murmur rippled through the hall. Amara froze, her heart plummeting. Sold her concepts? That was a lie. A calculated, poison lie. Daniel seized the moment, stepping forward with mock humility. Yes. Clarissa speaks the truth. We acquired certain early-stage sketches, but the true genius lies in what we've built from them. The company owes its future to this team, to me, not to some forgotten name in the past. The audience applauded. The trap had sprung. Amara's knees weakened. Clarissa hadn't been her ally. She had been Daniel's shield all along. The USB, the evidence, the whispers, it had all been bait. A way to test Amara, to see if she would rise, only to crush her before she could strike. Her throat burned as she clutched the tray tighter. She wanted to scream, to throw the truth in their faces. But the flash drive in her pocket suddenly felt like nothing, because Clarissa and Daniel had already twisted the narrative into something the board would believe. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. They may laugh now, but the day will come when the world bows to the mind they tried to bury. But what if that day never came? As the applause roared around her, Amara slipped quietly out of the hall, her eyes stinging with tears. The proof she had wasn't enough, not anymore. They had painted her as a nobody, a ghost from the past. And ghosts don't win battles. For the first time, doubt gnawed at her. Maybe I can't win. Maybe I'll always be the maid they mocked. But deep inside, a fire flickered. Weak, but alive. If they wanted her erased, she would have to come back louder. Stronger. With something they couldn't twist, couldn't bury. And she knew exactly where to find it. The night after the board meeting, the city's skyscrapers glittered like jewels against the dark sky. But in Amara's small apartment, there was only silence, heavy and suffocating. She sat slumped on her narrow bed, her uniform still on, her hands trembling around the useless flash drive. Her eyes were red, her lips pressed tightly to hold back sobs she had no strength left to hide. She had walked out of that hall invisible once again. Her truth drowned in Daniel's lies, her hope twisted into shame. The board members had applauded him, while she, the true mind behind their empire, had been left carrying a tray of drinks no one even finished. The memory replayed in her mind, Clarissa's cold voice, Daniel's smug smirk, the roaring applause that buried her like dirt on a grave. Her mother knocked gently on the door. "Amara," Mrs. West's frail voice whispered, "you haven't eaten." "I'm not hungry," Amara murmured. The old woman stepped in, her eyes filled with sorrow as she saw her daughter's broken frame. She sat beside her, taking Amara's hand. "My child, what happened?" Amara couldn't speak at first. Her throat tightened, her chest burning. But finally she whispered, "Mama, they stole everything. They called me nothing. They made me nothing." Her mother's grip tightened. "No, my child. They see you as nothing because they fear you are everything." But Amara shook her head. "What's the point, Mama? I tried. I gathered proof. I was ready. And still they buried me. Maybe I should stop fighting. Maybe this is all I'll ever be." Tears slid down her cheeks, hot and relentless. For the first time in years, the fire inside her seemed to flicker out. Her mother's eyes welled, but her voice was steady. "Amara, do you know why they mock you? Because they know that if the world ever sees your light, it will blind them. But if you choose to stay in the shadows, then you've already given them victory." Amara leaned into her mother's embrace, sobbing softly. But deep down, the words planted a seed. Not yet hope, just a reminder that her story wasn't finished. Days passed. At work, Amara returned to silence. She moved through the halls as though nothing had happened. Daniel smirked when he saw her, whispering to others loud enough for her to hear. "Still here? I thought ghosts vanished after dark." Laughter followed. Amara ignored it, but each word carved into her like a blade. Clarissa avoided her eyes altogether, as if Amara were truly invisible now. That hurt worse than Daniel's mockery. Because once, for a fleeting moment, Amara had believed Clarissa understood her struggle. Now she saw only another knife in her back. One evening, Amara went into the research lab to clean. She lingered by the prototype, her fingertips brushing its smooth surface. She thought, "Every line of you is mine." And yet the world applauds them. Her reflection in the polished surface looked like a stranger, tired, defeated, beaten. For the first time, she wondered if maybe she should accept the role they'd written for her. Maybe I was never meant to lead. Maybe I should just disappear. Her chest ached at the thought. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something. A drawer slightly ajar. Inside, a stack of documents labeled early development notes. She pulled them out, her heart stuttering as she flipped through. They were copies of her original sketches. Not just altered versions, her handwriting, her formulas, her diagrams, untouched. And they weren't labeled under Daniel's name. They were filed under hers. Her breath caught. Someone in the company had kept the originals. Someone had preserved her legacy when she thought it was erased. And suddenly she realized, the fight wasn't over. But the question burned. Who? That night, Amara stood at the window of her apartment, staring down at the city lights. She clenched the folder to her chest, torn between despair and a faint, flickering hope. The car on the corner was back again, its headlights off, waiting. Someone was watching her. Someone didn't want her truth to surface. For a long time, she considered throwing the folder into the fire. Ending it all. Walking away. But as she pressed her forehead to the glass, her mother's words returned, fierce and unyielding. They see you as nothing because they fear you are everything. Amara wiped her tears, her jaw tightening. She was not done. Not yet. Have you ever been at your lowest point, ready to give up, only to discover a small sign that kept you going? What was it? Amara didn't sleep that night. She sat at her desk with the folder open, every page of her handwritten notes spread out before her. Equations, sketches, prototypes, her soul on paper. For the first time in years, she looked at her work not through the eyes of a mocked maid, but through the eyes of the woman who created it. Each line of ink whispered a truth she had forgotten. I am brilliant. I am capable. I am not their servant. I am the architect of this empire. The despair of the past days began to shift into something else. Something sharper. Stronger. Anger, but also clarity. She whispered to herself, voice trembling but resolute. They stole my light because it was too bright. But if I stop shining, then they've won. And I refuse to let them win. The next morning, Amara entered the company with a different air. She still wore the maid's uniform, still carried her mop and bucket, but her eyes had changed. She moved with quiet confidence, studying the building not as a servant, but as its strategist. The corridors, the labs, the boardroom, this was her empire, built on her mind. They had forgotten that. But she hadn't. In the cafeteria, Daniel smirked as usual. Still scrubbing floors, genius? He mocked, sipping his coffee. Amara smiled faintly. For the first time, his words didn't pierce her. They only revealed his fear. One day, she said softly, you'll choke on those words. He blinked, thrown off, but she walked away before he could reply. Later that week, Amara found Clarissa waiting in the empty conference room. The woman's sharp eyes lingered on her, but this time there was no coldness, only weariness. You found the folder, Clarissa said simply. Amara froze. That was you. Clarissa nodded. I kept your originals. I couldn't let them erase you completely. Why? Amara's voice was hard, suspicious. Because once, Clarissa admitted, her gaze dropping, I was you. A woman underestimated, mocked, overlooked. But unlike you, I broke. I let them turn me into their weapon instead of their equal. Her voice cracked. You're still fighting. You remind me of what I lost. Amara's chest tightened. For a moment, she saw not a betrayer, but a mirror. Clarissa leaned in. Listen to me, Amara. You can't fight them on their terms. They own the stage, the spotlight, the applause. If you walk in unprepared again, they'll bury you alive. But if you play your game, quiet, precise, undeniable, they'll have no choice but to kneel. Amara stared at her, the fire in her chest growing. Teach me, she said finally. Over the next days, Amara worked in secret. By day, she cleaned floors and served tea. By night, with Clarissa's guidance, she pieced together a flawless case. Timelines, emails, prototypes, patents. The proof was no longer scattered, it was a weapon. And in the process, Amara herself changed. The hunched shoulders straightened. The silence became strategy. The uniform no longer felt like chains, but camouflage. For years they had seen only a maid. Now, she would make them see the genius behind the mask. In the mirror, she looked at herself one final time. Her eyes no longer carried defeat. They burned with a promise. I am Amara Adesawa, she whispered. And I am the storm you built your empire on. Now watch me take it back. Have you ever had a moment where you finally saw your own worth after years of doubt? How did it change the way you moved forward? The annual board presentation was the grandest event of the year. Investors, shareholders, and partners filled the glittering conference hall. Cameras clicked, journalists whispered, and the spotlight blazed on the stage where Daniel stood, radiating arrogance. Behind the curtain, Amara waited. She still wore the maid's uniform, mop tucked in the corner, as if she were there by accident. But her heart thundered with purpose. Clarissa gave her a sharp nod. Now or never. Daniel strutted to the podium, voice smooth and commanding. Ladies and gentlemen, today we unveil the future. A design that will change industries forever. And it is my honor. The massive screen behind him flickered to life, displaying the prototype. Gasps filled the hall. Investors leaned forward. Daniel's smirk widened. Until the screen glitched. One slide. Then another. Then another. Images, signatures, and sketches. Every blueprint bore the same faint watermark at the corner, Amara West. Confusion rippled through the audience. Murmurs grew louder. Daniel froze. What is this? From the shadows, Amara walked onto the stage. Slowly, deliberately. Every step echoed. The audience hushed. Daniel sputtered. What are you doing here? Get off the stage. You're just the maid. Amara's voice was steady, her gaze cutting through him. She turned to the crowd. For years, you've seen me mop your floors, serve your tea, and vanish into silence. But while you mocked me, I built this company's foundation. Every design you've celebrated, every prototype you've praised, it came from my hands. Guess. Disbelief. Some laughed nervously. But the screens behind her kept flashing undeniable proof. Patents, equations, diagrams, her work. Amara held up a folder. This isn't accusation. It's evidence. Timelines, drafts, signatures, all mine. They stole my voice and buried me in a uniform. But you cannot bury brilliance forever. Daniel lunged toward her, sweat dripping. She's lying. A delusional servant trying to steal my work. Really? Clarissa's voice rang out as she stepped into the light, holding up the original folder. Because I was there when she wrote these equations. And I was there when you stole them. The room erupted. Investors stood, shouting questions. Cameras flashed like lightning. Daniel paled, his empire crumbling in real time. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm presence commanded the room. This company runs on my genius. And today, I reclaim my place, not as your maid, but as your mind. The board members, whispering furiously among themselves, turned. The chairman rose slowly. Miss Adesawa, if what you claim is true, then the future of this company belongs to you. Amara's eyes met his, unwavering. I don't claim, she said softly. I prove. She handed him the folder. Silence fell as he flipped through the pages, his face shifting from doubt to awe. Finally, he looked up, voice ringing clear. She is telling the truth. The hall exploded, investors clapping, journalists rushing forward, Daniel shouting protests as security closed in around him. And in the center of it all, Amara stood tall. The maid they mocked was gone. Before them stood the architect of the empire. The hall erupted in chaos. Some cheered, some whispered, some simply stared in disbelief. Reporters swarmed forward with cameras flashing like lightning, all shouting Amara's name. Daniel fought against security guards, his voice cracking with desperation. She's nothing. She's nobody. You can't take my company from me. But the more he screamed, the smaller he looked. The mask of power was gone. Amara didn't even glance his way. He no longer mattered. In the days that followed, headlines blazed across the nation. The maid behind the empire. From mop to sew, the genius they tried to erase. Daniel exposed, a legacy of lies. Shareholders demanded a restructure. The board voted swiftly. Daniel was removed, stripped of his position and reputation. And Amara? She was offered the role of CEO, the rightful leader of the empire she had built in silence. When she walked into the office for the first time, no mop in her hand, but her own keycard and title, the entire staff turned. Many lowered their eyes in shame. Others clapped softly. Amara didn't need their validation. She wasn't there to humiliate them. She was there to lead. Clarissa's redemption. Clarissa entered her office one afternoon, hesitation in her eyes. "You could have destroyed me too," she said quietly. "I stood by them for years. I helped bury you." Amara studied her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "But you also helped me rise when it mattered most. We all lose ourselves sometimes. What matters is who we choose to be when we're given a second chance." Clarissa's eyes glistened. For the first time in years, she exhaled like a woman finally freed. "Then let me serve you the right way this time," she whispered. And from then on, Clarissa became her fiercest ally. One evening, long after the office had emptied, Amara stood by the glass windows overlooking the city skyline. The same city that once laughed at her now whispered her name with respect. She thought of her mother, of the nights spent studying under a flickering bulb, of every insult, every mocking laugh, every floor scrubbed with hands that deserved to hold pens and blueprints. It had all led here. Her reflection in the glass no longer looked like a maid. It looked like a queen who had reclaimed her crown. When the press finally asked her how it felt to go from servant to CEO, Amara smiled into the cameras. "They mocked me because they feared me. They erased me because they knew I was unforgettable. So let this be a reminder to anyone listening. You can bury brilliance under rags, under laughter, under lies, but truth will always rise." The room thundered with applause. Amara walked out of the building that night, the city lights painting her in gold. She passed the janitor mopping the lobby floor, the same place she once stood invisible. She stopped, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Never let them tell you what you're worth. Sometimes the strongest crowns are hidden under the humblest uniforms." The janitor's eyes widened, and Amara walked into the night, her empire waiting, her dignity restored. She was no longer the maid. She was the genius they could never erase. What lesson do you take from Amara's journey? Do you believe greatness can stay hidden forever, or will it always find a way to rise? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Thank you for watching this story to the end.